Donna, will you send me the recording?
Yeah.
Wait, why are we recording on photos?
Are you all ready?
Yeah.
So wait, can we maybe close the doors?
Getting there.
Yeah, I'm all ready. What's the order for the album?
We're gonna go top of case.
Who knows?
No longer. I'll stop with you.
We'll see. It's reacting.
Like kind of.
Very short.
One very
Do a
short.
little bit more.
Okay. Yeah, you'll see.
So I would read this.
Should we do some introductions first?
Yeah.
Or okay. So I'm Zoe. I'll be the first and third speaker for Menlo and the affirmation.
I'm Chris Ziegelson. I'll be the second speaker for Menlo and App.
And are these three the judges here?
Oh, sorry. I'm Vesta, going to be the first speaker in the opposition for Menlo.
I'll be Sean Kumar, second speaker opposite.
Okay, great. So I'm just gonna remain seated, but order is just gonna go top of case, our two advantages, and then one preemptive t-shirt. Okay. My time will begin in 3, 2, 1. Hi, my name is Soham, and I'm proud to affirm the resolution. Norway should ban imports of fish meal and fish oil from Africa. Some background information here. 1. Norway's salmon industry imports fish meal and fish oil from West Africa to feed farmed salmon. It's called blue food imperialism that worsens the food insecurity and overfishing in some of the poorest coastal communities. So our plan text is just the resolution that we will ban the imports, and our method of implementation will be normal ways and means. Funding will be as needed. That's that. The actor will be Norway. The time frame will be to enact in 1 year. So our first advantage is going to be food insecurity. So the uniqueness here is 1. Small fish in West Africa are the main affordable animal protein for millions of people, and turning them into feed for Norwegian salmon is directly undermining regional food security. So 2, they currently catch and keep 1.3 million tons of small pelagics per year, which is 76% inefficient to feed the starving population. If all the fish were kept rather than scrapped, it would be enough to feed 82% of West Africans who are starving, so over 20 million. So 3, hundreds of thousands of fish are diverted into human food instead of diverted from human food into animal feed. So 4.36 million people lack access to enough food, and the amount of people who lack proper nutrients are another 52.7 million. So the links here are 1, the plan passes and West Africans will be sold. West Africans, their actual fish will be sold to them. So this fish that can be consumed. So 2, jobs are lost because the actual process is actually done by machines in the status quo. The impacts here are 1, less starvation and better quality of life, and less death, right? We tell you that the current problem is that the Norwegians are willing to pay more, which means that the fish that can be consumed by West Africans is going there. However, if it's banned, then they're forced to sell to the next highest bidder, which in the status quo is the West Africans. The food is obviously food is a fundamental right, and we tell you that it's incredibly important that these people are able to eat in the first place. So now onto our second advantage, which is on the environment. The uniquest point here is 1, overfishing in Africa is getting worse in the status quo. A, in the northeast and northeast Africa, over half of fish stocks are overfished compared to 3.5% globally. B, in Ghana, landings of small pelagic fish used to make up fish meal and fish oil fell by 59% in recent years despite an increase in fishing efforts. C, Maritime's fish meal and fish oil exports tripled when between 2010 and 2020. 2, overfishing is extremely harmful, especially industrial overfishing, because of a couple reasons here. So trawlers kill coral reefs. A, coral reefs are one of the huge carbon sinks in our world. Killing them releases huge amounts of CO2 and destroys future capacity. So B, coastal reefs in Africa sequester 10 million tons of CO2 per year. C, coral reef collapses cause more coastal flooding as reefs act as natural like breakwaters, flooding to poor African communities that are less financially resilient than most of the world, which is extremely poor. D, reef organisms are sources of key vitamins needed in medicine like antibiotics and antivirals. So the third point here is Norwegian salmon industry causes overfishing. A, farmed Atlantic salmon alone accounted for about 60% of all fish oil used in global aquaculture in 2020. The number is still rising here. B, major Norwegian feed producers like Maui, Skettering, and Cargill Biomar are all source fish oil from Northeast Africa. C, Norway and Chile are the largest importers of fish oil and fish meal. 4, methods of salmon fishing in Norway are uniquely bad. A, trawling. The seafloor maps show Norwegian fishing tactics cut biodiversity by almost 20% in some regions, right? They actually take a boat and they trawl at the very bottom of the ocean floor, and it destroys a lot of coral, and it hurts biodiversity. So B, a study found that 340,000 tons of seafloor animal biomes were destroyed. So links here are: 1, the plan passes banning fish oils and fish meal imports from Norway. 2, fish populations rise again in Africa. There's 3 implications here: A, biodiversity; B, diversification of industry; and C, discourages negative fishing practices. So the biodiversity, why that's actually important, is 1, the loss of biodiversity leads to the loss of medicine. 75% of medicine relies on the biodiversity within this area. So 2, 55% of global GDP relies on this. Sorry, I'll take that in a second. On biodiversity and high functioning ecosystems. The links here are 3, it validates environmental NGOs. The example of this is Greenpeace, in encouraging them to continue advocating. The impacts here are a decrease in biodiversity loss, which I already told you is extremely important because it harms things like medicine, it harms, right? Biodiversity is all connected, so it harms these fishers because they produce fish. I'll take it later. Okay, now on to our one. Okay, I'll take your POI.
Okay, are you saying the link to biodiversity is just overfishing leads to just a collapse of like less fish
And the trawling, yeah.
in the region, which leads to environmental NGOs pulling out?
No, it's unrelated to NGOs. Like biodiversity and NGOs are like 2 separate things.
Okay.
Okay, you all set? Okay. So I'm going to continue on with our preemptive T-shell. The interrupt here is the neg may not contest the acclamations framework if the standard is util, and the role of the ballot is to vote for the team with the best post-fiat implication. The violation is with net benefits, not util. The violation here is that this is a preemptive T-shell. The standards here are 1, time skew. 845 rebuttal skew allows the neg to spread out the acclamation in the block, with the PMR having no way to win. A, empirically verified with TOC 60% neg bias. B, means we have just to win and weigh offense against our case in the PMR instead of having to win framework and offense in 5 minutes of time. C, AFC check is key to fairness because it ensures that the PMC and MG can actually generate offense rather than framework defense. 2, clash. We give the PMC in the dark while the neg can adapt and gain advantage by engaging the acclamation on multiple layers. A, the PMC is only on one layer while the negation can act as procedural and discursive arguments and alternative frameworks, all of which are out to the ballot, which with the AFC we force the neg to clash with the AF on substance, protecting clash, which is key to discussion and therefore education. The voters here are 1, if the neg argues the AFC is not the answer to the neg bias, they must propose an alternative solution to leveling the field, otherwise prefer AFC for risk of solvency. That was a strong vote after making sentence today. Thank you.
And then can we get the point?
I passed my test earlier.
Okay, so can you just quick clarify something?
Yeah.
So you're saying the weighing mechanism is net benefits,
Yes.
and the role of the ballot is to evaluate the
Team with the best.
post-fiat impacts?
Yeah.
Okay.
For all, yeah.
Okay.
But then it's not as good.
It was like a public forum for the first time, and like they were just talking and they didn't have time, and I'm just like, this is
Yeah.
I'm old, so don't worry about it.
Louis, what's the text of the interrupt again?
The negative may not contest.
May
May never
never.
contest never contest the AFS framework if the standard is net benefits and the role of the ballot is to vote for the team with the best post-fiat impacts.
Implication.
Yeah. Now. Okay. The order for the nag is going to be.
Just 2 off.
to decide in the album. Sure. Timer starts in the first. We can see the AFC. The first disadvantage is on Western African collapse. The thesis here is that Norway's salmon industry is the primary thing that justifies the existence of the West African fish processing sector. The ASO point here is on anchor markets. Norway is the world's largest salmon producer and feeds giants like fish giant producers like Cargill and Skretting, controlling nearly 100% of the market indirectly. The BSO point here is that 90% of Mauritanian
Generation oil is imported.
Oil is imported by Norway. 63% of the Gambia and around 32% of Mauritania's GDP comes specifically from this fishing thing. This represents billions of dollars and affects African nations specifically through Norwegian importing. The CISA point here is that there's over 600,000 workers in Africa reliant on fishmeal and fish oil. The warrant here is the grain collapse in Somalia. We saw over 400% more young people become terrorists post this industry collapsing. We can see that post the industry collapsing, they then went to Al Qaeda and became because they lost a source of livelihood and had no other place to prove. This is proven. In 2005 to 2006, Senegalese fish stock crisis led to the collapse of the industry and 36,000 people joining Al Qaeda. Their argument about how they can fill in by fishing for sustenance fish doesn't work insofar as Norway pays drastically more money. The DESA point here is on fish collapse. Local populations can only consume fresh fish. The sardinella cannot be consumed by the local fish. Only they can use it for fish meal. Well, this is especially crucial to note as defense here because this means that there's toxins in the fish. You literally cytotoxins in the fish. You literally cannot consume it as food. Everything they say about how sustenance farming is going to fill it is probably not true. But we can also see that there's a second cultural reason here insofar as eating the sardinella is literally sacrilege or something in a lot of these cultures, and we can see that there's probably not a reason why this is ever going to be viable for sustenance farming. The first impact here is on mass death. We think the growth of terrorist organizations is going to lead to some sort of regional instability insofar as we can empirically see terrorist organizations are bad and they lead to instability. But this specifically leads to more regional instability. More regional instability means greater control of dictatorships which control natural resources, which is probably going to lead to mass death in the region. Specifically, we can see that Africa is uniquely susceptible to mass death insofar as dictatorships are already rife, and the increase in terrorist groups is going to take any semblance of NGO aid or Western involvement in the region away. Yeah, Somalia is probably a great example. Instability there killed thousands of people. The second disadvantage is the largest one here. This is on the soy pivot. The ASO point here is that salmon is a huge part of the Norwegian economy. The I to this is that 93% of fish farmed in Norway is salmon. The double I to this is that 8,300 jobs are in the industry. These are lifelong fishers. They're not going to shift out of the fishing industry if they lose their fish meal. They're going to try and figure a way out. The triple I to this is that they have indirect control of nearly 100% of the salmon industry. The BSO point here is that fish oil is crucial to salmon farming. 90% of Mauritian oil goes to Norway, but we can also see that this is the best source of food and the biggest source of food for the region. They cannot pivot to other countries of fish oil, though. This is the crucial thing. Fishers are going to keep fishing, but fish oil cannot fill in from other countries. Why is this? The biggest producers of fish oil, which are Peru and Chile, are already maxed out. They're binding into long-term contracts with countries like the United States and China. They can't just shift out to giving fish oil to Norway. But we can also see that it's just much more expensive to buy fish oil, which is really premium and really nice, from other countries. Buying it from West Africa is the only way that the Norwegian industry can survive. The CISA point here is that, buying it from West Africa is the best thing to do for the Norwegian industry. The CISA point here is the crucial argument. They're going to pivot to soy. Our argument here is that soy is the most logical thing to go to. This is the only thing that can still feed fish. It's farmed in Brazil. It's fairly cheap. It just makes most amount of sense. We think that 8,300 workers are not going to shift away to other industries. The fishing industry has to survive insofar as this is their entire livelihoods. They've staked their lives on it. Now, our argument. 3 reasons why soy is uniquely worse. The first reason here is that soy is farmed unsustainably. The ASO point here is that Brazil soy farming is farmed by slash and burn practices in the Cerrado region of the Amazon rainforest. The BSO point here is on deforestation. Rainforests cannot recover post-deforestation, so we think this is a uniquely irreversible impact. But we can also see that the Cerrado farmers are nowhere near maxed out. This is because the other largest importers of fish oil are the United States and China, which don't want to deal with these shady Amazonian practices. We think Norway has to, though, because of livelihoods. The CISA point here is that the Amazon is the internal link to saving the environment. It's literally 5% of all the carbon recapture, and we also think it's uniquely a carbon sink for the region, which is probably crucial to any sort of global warming impacts. The second reason here is that soy is just more expensive. SPC, which is what it's called from Brazil, is more expensive than this Mauritian fish oil. This leads to an increase in the price of fish. You have to pay them, you have to feed them more soy, and you still get Sorry, you have to feed them more soy to get the same amount of fish. Our argument here is that Norway is crucial to the global fishing industry. It indirectly controls nearly 100% and directly controls more than 50%. 3 billion people rely on fish, and increasing the cost of salmon is uniquely bad for these people because they tend to be on the margins. They don't have too much money to spare, and therefore when fish prices go up, they're not going to be able to afford things, so they have to cut things out of their livelihood, which is probably bad insofar as it literally leads to starvation, as we've seen with global food chain collapse in the past, but also literal death. The three argument here is that soy leads to disease and fish collapse. This is especially crucial. The ASO point here is that Atlantic salmon are carnivores. They rely on fish meal for their health. Lectins in fish meal are a natural defense against disease. The BSO point here is that eating a high soy diet coats the intestines of the fish with this like soy slimy stuff. I don't really know how it works exactly, but it doesn't hurt the fish directly, but it makes them more susceptible to disease. This is especially crucial. The CSO point here is that this ruins their susceptibility to disease. Therefore, when a bug comes or like when some sort of disease comes to the region, this is going to sweep the entire thing. This is the same thing we saw in Hawaii when like the dwarf bananas died out or something like that. But this is also the same thing that happened in Chile in 2007, which the ISA fish virus literally wiped out the entirety of the region insofar as they were using soy to feed their fish. This makes them so much more susceptible to disease. We can see that disease literally wipes out the entire Norwegian fishing industry. These people who are fishing are too short-term to think of defenses against this. This means that there's a hugely high risk of over the next 50 years of disease coming through and sweeping out the entire fishing industry, which is disastrous for global food chains and links into the death of 3 million people, or at least mass starvation in that region. But yeah.
Why would they have soy then? Why would they have it?
Norway is the largest salmon. Where does all this?
Yeah, there's 8,300 people. It's their largest industry. They depend on it, so they have to get fish oil somewhere, right? Peru and Chile can't fill in because they're binded into long-term contracts and they're already maxed out. Therefore, they look to soy. They're also pretty short-term thinking people insofar as they just care about their livelihoods for the next 15 to 20 years. They don't have like the, or a lot of them don't have like the long-term thinking. The long-term thinking to do things. So soy is the only way that they can actually fill in. Also, there's the precedent. Chile doing the exact same thing when they lost fish meal from whatever it's called. Okay, on to the app. Their first advantage is on food insecurity here. First, they tell you that there's like small fish are really crucial to Africa. You know, whatever. Sardinellas are really important. 3 responses to this. The first response here is extend the thing about the cultural problem. These people literally, it's sacrilege to eat these fish. You're not going to fill in through subsistence farming because they're not going to eat the fish. It's literally like against their religious beliefs, so it makes no sense to do this. The 2 point here is that it's not edible. We've literally already told you there's cytotoxins in this food. They probably shouldn't be risking like eating these huge cytotoxins. It's going to lead to more death. It's probably worse for their overall health. But the third argument here is that it's probably just it's therefore non-unique because food insecurity does not change regardless of the sardinella population. Their second advantage is in environment. They say overfishing is getting worse. They say there's going to be more and more and more fishing. Problem here. Wait, what was the argument?
The argument is that they have no other natural resource. They have to.
Oh yeah. The argument here is this is probably non-unique. There's no other natural resource in this region. These people are lifelong fishers again, so they're going to continue fishing. There's no reason why they're going to stop fishing. Therefore, this is entirely non-unique insofar as overfishing is going to continue. Then they say there's this whole coral reef like environment scenario here. We tell you coral reefs are already collapsed in the region. Literally, like the Great Barrier Reef or something is 90% dead. The same is probably true of Africa. This means that because coral reefs are very, very slow to recuperate, there's no risk of the coral reefs actually recuperating and doing anything for the environment. So all the damage has already been done. Then they say that there's going to be like huge biodiversity and that leads to medicine. Again, they lose the link insofar as it's non-unique.
Awesome. The speech will hopefully be slower than that. I'm gonna go the first neg disad, the second neg disad, the first advantage, the second advantage. Okay, great. My time starts in 3, 2, 1. Turn the first advantage entirely at the point at which biodiversity, decreasing fishing is good because biodiversity is extremely important in the status quo. We think that importantly, biodiversity is going down in the status quo, and that means that we're losing medicine. That means that we're losing things like antivirals and antibiotics. At that point, we think that decreasing the fishing industry in Africa is a good thing because it also allows people to get more sustainable jobs in other industries if they're not actually being forced to work in the fishing industry. No, thank you. I'll take protected time. Okay. Also, yeah. Okay. They read you all these impacts about all these like warrants about like the 2005 to 2006 Senegal fish crisis. They talk about how like 36,000 people joined Al Qaeda. I really don't think that this is causation. I think this is pretty probably correlated. If people lose a job in the fishing industry, they're not going to say, let me go join Al Qaeda and become a terrorist. We think that's illogical. We don't think they can prove a causal link there. We think it's very unlikely that just losing a job in the fishing industry is going to make you go and become a terrorist. We think that they're not going to access their impacts right there. They talk about the cultural like sardinella sacrilege. We think that if people are like already starving in the status quo, they're probably not going to care and they're just going to be able to eat what they can. And at the point at which they're not having any food in the status quo, we think that any food is better than no food, even if it's sacrilegious for them to eat it. We think they can probably get over it. They also talk about how like it justifies existence of like other markets. Yeah, I'll take it.
Do starving people in India who are super religious eat cows when they're in abundance?
I don't know.
No.
You can answer that in your speech, I guess. Okay. We also think that, this contention is turned at the point at which a decrease in fishing is a good thing in Africa. Okay, go to the second disadvantage about the soy pivot. They talk about 8,300 jobs in salmon. We think that importantly, that's not like too many jobs. Also, we don't think that these jobs are going to be lost in our world at the point at which the salmon industry will continue, at the point at which they're going to be able to, at the point at which fish oil is literally just a supplement to make the salmon prettier. It's not necessary to like the nutrition. I'll get to like the nutrition thing at the bottom. But basically, we think that fish oil isn't like the most necessary ingredient in salmon. That means that a decrease in imports of fish oil and fish meal is not going to destroy the salmon industry of Norway. That means that these 8,300 jobs are not unique insofar as they happen in both worlds. Also, they talk about how like the fishers are going, like they talk about Peru and Chile. Importantly, in Chile, it's also one of the biggest importers of fish oil, which means that their past precedent argument doesn't work because Chile is one of the biggest importers of fish meal and fish oil. They haven't banned it in the status quo, which means that there's no past precedent as to a pivot to soy. Okay, they talk about 3 reasons why soy is bad. Their first is unsustainable. They say soy is uniquely bad. Unfortunately, all 2 reasons are non-unique, so it's not uniquely bad. The first is that it's unsustainable. We think that fishing is also unsustainable at the point at which we've literally seen an increase in fishing but a decrease in yields in the past like 30 years, which probably is going to show you that fishing is just as unsustainable as soy is. They talk about deforestation. We think that like basically they're deforesting the ocean in their world at the point at which like the same thing is happening. We think that these reasons are non-unique. Also, they talk about how an increase in salmon prices is uniquely bad. We think that the people who are buying salmon are not the people who are going to care about like a $10 hike in salmon prices at the point at which if you're like poor and starving, you're not going to be trying to like live off of salmon. You're going to be living off of like much more cheaper food. So like an increase in salmon prices is not going to hit people that hard. They talk about how like soy leads to disease. We think that at the point at which they're literally reading you like 10 billion disadvantages to soy, the rest of the industry is not going to want to switch to soy at the point at which it's clearly very, very bad for the fish. So you can take all of their reasons about why all of the disadvantages to soy as a reason why you can buy that the fishing industry is not going to use soy as a substitute for fish oil. They literally cherry pick their examples here. We think that there's very likely other forms of like supplements that you could use instead of fish oil instead of soy that are like better for soy and are not going to grease the livers of the fish. Okay. Okay. Go to the affirmation case. On food security, they talk about first the cultural issue. We'd rather people have food than have no food, even if they think it's sacrilegious. They say that 2, it's inedible. We think it's only inedible because they're using these extremely harmful like industrial trawling practices that are like leaching chemicals into the fish. We think that at the point at which they don't have to like fill a huge demand for Norway, that's like literally going to cut them off if they don't fill it. It's probably going to mean that there's more healthy fishing practices in our world at the point at which they're not trying to like mass industrial farm a bunch of fish, and instead they're going to use like it's going to like encourage smaller fishing industries and like smaller fisheries to spring up and be able to farm smaller amounts of fish at a time. It's probably going to be that the fish is going to become healthier in the world of affirmation, which is probably going to solve for their inedible argument. And in any case, it's a turn. They say it's non-unique without any analysis attached. I don't think it's non-unique at the point at which we think that food security is going to increase in our world because people are literally not going to be able to not being forced to export massive amounts of fish to Norway. We think that what's happening in the status quo, per the conceded status quo analysis my partner reads to you, is that people are literally fishing like massive amounts of fish, but they're forced to turn all of it into fish meal and fish oil because of like the corporate breeding people at the top of the corporate food chain. And basically what happens is in our world they're no longer allowed to send all of that fish oil and fish meal. They're no longer allowed to convert that fish into fish oil and fish meal and send it to another nation. That probably means that they're going to have far more amounts of small pelagic fish, which is the type of fish that gets converted, which probably means that they're going to have a much greater food source. Importantly, it's also high in nutrients and high in protein, which is conceded analysis that my partner reads to you, which means it's going to bolster their diets and make them healthier in general. Okay. Go to the second advantage about the environment. I think this is extremely important and they don't touch on it enough. They talk about how people must keep fishing, right? We agree that they must keep fishing, but they don't need to fill a massive quota, an unreachable quota that's forcing them to drain out the huge amounts, the decreasing amounts of fish in Norway. Also, importantly, because they're no longer forced to fill this quota, we think that the fish in the ocean, the literal amount of fish in the ocean is going to increase. There will quite literally be more fish in the sea for people to eat. at that point, we think that people are going to have more food, their diets are going to be able to become better, and because they're not needing to fill a massive, often unreachable demand of like fish, inedible fish meal and inedible fish oil, they're going to be able to eat that fish that they're working so hard to farm. Okay, they kind of drop a lot of other things. Oh yeah, and even if they have to keep fishing, we think that's a good thing. We also think that they don't need to keep fishing as much because they're not being like forced to. On our biodiversity stuff, they basically try to non-unique our coral reefs point away. That's not the point. Even if some coral reefs are dying in the status quo, that's not a reason to just like sacrifice the rest of them to the wolves and say like, okay, coral reefs are gone. We think that coral reefs are extremely important for a couple of reasons. One is that they're a massive carbon sink. So if we're trawling, if we're killing coral reefs, then we're releasing carbon into the air, and we're also taking away a massive source that pulls carbon away from the air, which is going to decrease carbon emissions writ large. But then also, we think that coral reefs are extremely important insofar as the actual coral itself is a source of biodiversity that people use to make antibiotics and antivirals, which is a source of medicine. That's another export that they can have. Like if they're able to use the coral to make these sorts of medicine, it's another viable export that the people of West Africa can have. They're probably going to be able to garner a lot more money from because it's much more rare. People also eat the fish in the first place. The country is predominantly Muslim, and they have no issue eating fish. Many West African countries have like Muslim beliefs, also North African. Also, yeah, they don't really give you any analysis attached to their Sardinella argument. So for that reason, yeah. Okay, thank you, Koda.
Okay, great speech. The order is the advantages in order, and then the disadvantages. Okay, time begins. Now, the primary contradiction of the government case is this. Simultaneously, we will feed and farm fish to feed our local population, but at the same time, we will also solve overfishing. One is true and one is not. We're going to go with this argument. The scenario of the affirmative is this. Sure, Norway bans fish oil, but they don't get access to their advantage too, because maybe we trigger advantage one, insofar as you overfish to feed your local population. This is the most probable link scenario. What happens is that Norway pays a premium for fish. They pay a lot of money for this Sardinella, but your local African population can't pay that much. So guess what you have to do? You have to fish more to make up for that lost margin. This is the most probable and clear link that will happen in today's round. This kind of goes conceded throughout the round insofar as people in Africa, particularly West Africa, in the Gambia, in Mauritius, can't pay prices that Norway can pay. This is probably conceded throughout the entirety of the round. What happens then? If you are a person in Africa and West Africa, and you're the one that is trying to, you are literally, your livelihood is catching fish, and all of a sudden Norway says, we're not buying your fish anymore, well, what's most probable for you to do? You have fishing equipment, likely your 3 generations of families have been fishers, if not like 10 generations. Your entire cultural community, there's like coastal villages of fishing. Well, you're not just going to abandon that. You're going to double down on that. You're going to try and fish as much as possible. We say you turn advantage to. That gets triggered under the affirmative because they have to catch more fish so they can make up for the lost profit because Norway can't pay that premium anymore. Yeah.
If your entire livelihood is like fishing, don't you think you're going to be culturally okay eating fish?
Oh yeah, we can see that. So that's our link scenario. Okay, so first, all the impacts trigger under the affirmative in terms of the environment. We see that overfishing, collapse, medicine, all of that gets triggered under the affirmative. Then, on food insecurity, we say that we're still winning this, insofar as there's still, there's still some probability of disease, but it's the only option, remember, it's the only option for these fishers to sell to the local African population. That means there's higher disease. That means maybe, okay, sure, you're able to solve some food insecurity in Africa, but still, you've killed the entirety of the environment due to overfishing, because remember the overfishing term that's incredibly key, but also you have more disease as a result of this, probably like side effects of these cytotoxins. But remember, there's no other option, so people have to eat this fish because there's food insecurity happening. You outweigh their advantage one with their advantage two, insofar as they say biodiversity is responsible for 75% of medicine, insofar as coral reefs collapsing causes millions and millions of deaths, insofar as all of these reasons environmentally is a sustainable reason why the entirety of Africa is going to go to it's going to go all downhill. So their affirmative case bites themselves. we say you pull the trigger on advantage 2 over advantage 1 because we have our turn here that you have to overfish because these people literally are getting less money, so they have to fish more. That's all they know how to do. They have to fish more and more, and if they don't fish, then you trigger our Al-Qaeda scenario, which we'll go to later. Okay, go to the disadvantage 1 on West African collapse. This is pretty clean. They say here that there's biodiversity going down, they're losing medicine, it's blah blah. They essentially advocate for the collapse of the essentially of the market. So the only way, once again, for you to not collapse the market is for you to go and sell to African people, which is what they want to do. Remember, so the world, like, clearing this all up is that you're selling to African people, but they probably can't pay as much as Norwegian people, and you're going to try and try and try. You're going to overfish, but it's not going to be sustainable. In the long term, your economy is going to go bust. Because your entire system and reliance is on a foreign power, a Western power, buying your sardinella or your whatever that type of fish is. Like, they are paying a premium for it because they literally need it. And note, salmon farming is heavily reliant. It's called fish meal because it's a meal for the fish. The fish needs to eat the meal to survive, or else the fish dies. It's that simple. They need the meal to survive. So Norway needs some way to feed the fish. I mean, it's not just like fish oil and like, you know, you have like 90-year-old women who want to have fish oil. It's more important than that. It's like fish meal literally is responsible for the survival of the fish. So it's pretty important. Either that happens or you have soy, which we trigger what's going to happen for Norway. So this is what happens in disadvantage 1. You can say either double bind, either you have like supermassive overfishing and you try to fish a ton, which leads to long-term economic ruin, or they aren't able to make up for it, which means you have a massive economic collapse. Look to Somalia, where people and pirates are rampant because they lost their jobs. They have no other option. You say here you have massive terrorism, not right now, sorry. You have massive terrorism. You see massive deaths in Somalia, in Senegal. There's so many examples we give you of this being a pretty probable link case. They say it's not probable. It is pretty probable. If you lose your job and you're in one of these African nations that's swarmed by piracy, you're likely to join a terrorist organization. It's pretty simple. Terrorist organizations cause mass death. Among the fact that you probably just lost your job and your livelihood, you're in cyclical poverty, and your entire family is starving, that's probably pretty bad. Mass death in Africa is really bad. Western Africa is going to collapse as a result of the AF plan. But by far the biggest place you can vote here is disadvantage 2, because there's no explanation at all. They say fish meal is not important. I kind of made an elaborate demonstration of why it is important. But beside that, Norway has a big fishing industry. Everyone in Norway loves salmon. They all love salmon. It's like a part of their culture. Like you can see, like, you know, the Nordic states, whatever, they're like big up there. They love fish, right? And so salmon is a big part of their culture. Not only that, but also there are people in Norway that have dedicated their lives, and not only that, but giant corporations. Giant multinational corporations that are dedicated to salmon farming because they make billions and billions of dollars. Now, what are they going to do? They're just going to collapse their fish and salmon? No, they're going to find alternative ways to get the fish meal. And as Vesta has said, there's really no other way to get fish meal because Peru and Chile, these two major places where you can get fish meal, are already in long-term contracts with the United States, which means you can't get fish meal anymore. So what's the alternative to fish meal? They say there must be some alternative. Yeah, that alternative is soy. The soy alternative is the biggest trigger and the biggest link scenario here, insofar as there's literally no other way you can feed your fish. Your fish are going to die. So you have to buy Brazilian soy. What happens? You trigger the entire link scenario. You say here that soy causes more disease. The Atlantic, we see there's lectin in fish oil that allows for the breakdown of toxins, but that doesn't exist in soy. Soy is more slimy, which leads to more susceptibility. Chile looks at the 2007 ISA fish virus, where there's a huge risk, and millions of thousands of people effectively were affected by this disease. There's also soy is more expensive, which leads to a hike in prices, which means more people are effectively displaced as a result of not getting access to this. They also say that it's not that important, but sure, there are people in Norway, I think like salmon is like a pretty big pretty important commodity in the entirety of the country. So if anything, more poor people, more marginalized people inside of Norway are going to struggle more. You can also extend this fact that soy is farmed unsustainably, and deforestation is irreversible. The Amazon is 5% of the carbon sinks, which means that this is probably triggers a massive extinction scenario of hundreds and millions of deaths. This is probably the worst impact insofar as soy has been turned away, but if there's no other option to feed the fish, you have to do it because these giant multinational corporations don't really care about the environment, and they will do anything they want to secure and maximize their profit. So at the end of the day, where are you voting? There's a lot of places to vote, but I think cleanly, take out the AF offense on their turn to advantage one on the food insecurity. They barely provide anybody with food. Insofar as long-term, you collapse the economy because you overfish so much, you kill the entirety of the environment. You can just, all their links, extend it, impact, and turn it on them, and then extend all of our impacts on disadvantage 1 and disadvantage 2, and it's pretty clear you should vote neg. Norway.
Yeah, sure. Okay, great.
Policy is going to be. Yep, probably.
Your ballot is really simple. There's nothing left on the app insofar as there's this great turn cleanly conceded. The only way for the fishers in Mauritania and all of these East African countries to make their money is to continue fishing. Well, now they're not getting so much profits from the Norwegians, so what they do is they increase the amount of fishing. Therefore, the overfishing scenario triggers, which means we get access to their second contention. This is on the environment. They say that coral reefs are the internal link to fishing. Coral reefs are the internal link to the entire biological stability of the region. Well, if you overfish in the short term, then you probably collapse coral reefs. You probably collapse the biological stability of the region in the long term. Therefore, this turn takes out their second contention and uses it against their first contention. The weighing is very, very simple here. In the short term, we can grant them. They might resolve a small amount of food insecurity insofar as these people are fishing and fishing more. The problem here is these East African people are probably short-term focused. They don't have any other alternative. They're literally living on the brink. The only thing they can do is to... the only thing they can do is to continue fishing. They continue to fish. They continue to use all of their harmful practices, probably to an even greater degree. The implication, therefore, is that 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line, the environmental stability of the region goes down. Food insecurity not only goes back to its original level, but probably crashes way below that insofar as there's literally no fish left. You've overfished the region. You've destroyed the entire place. Therefore, the AF case has nothing. Where's the cleanest place for you to vote on op? Okay. On op, we can look to the soy pivot argument as the cleanest place to vote. Our argument here is specifically about this disease that we can go for as the best one here. The argument is you have to turn to soy. They concede that there's literally no other source of soy. Like, I think Persis says in the MG that they won't turn to soy because it's obviously bad, but our argument is that you literally have nothing else to do as a fisher. If you want to keep making money, and if corporations are going to keep forcing you to fish, then the only thing you can do is literally just be short-term focused and take up that risk of fish collapse and disease and all of these things. Oh, yeah, exactly. But also we see, but salmon farming corporations need to also feed their salmon. This is the only thing they can do, which means they have to weather the risk of soy. Specifically, the disease collapse argument is very clean here. We've seen countless examples, specifically Chile 2007, or even like the Hawaiian banana example still applies here. If like a disease goes through your population and your population doesn't have any sort of biological resistance, it's going to kill the entire population. We think the impact scenario is very simple here. If all the salmon in Norway die, which has like the majority of the world's salmon, there's no more salmon in the world, and therefore all the people who rely on salmon are going to die. They say that, well, like, salmon is only eaten by rich people. I don't think this makes any sense. Salmon is literally eaten in East Asian markets. It's pretty common there, but it's also common in the West, and there's still, like, poverty people in the West. Like, this doesn't really make sense. There's obviously going to be some sort of negative impact, specifically in the context of poverty or death. We can also see that there's another environment argument here, which if you cross-apply to the environment debate, we say that it's farmed unsustainably. Brazil is going to continue using their slash and burn techniques. The Amazon is more important than anything they say about the environment. It's literally the biggest carbon sink in the world. They concede this, which means that it has more carbon recapture potential, and therefore it is more important than their arguments, which means we win the environment. We win the environment debate. You can even look to the GA1 as another place for you to vote here. It's a little bit less clean, but I still think the argument works very simply. We tell you that there's a double bind. Either these people are going to overfish or they're going to lose their jobs. If they lose their jobs, what happens? They're going to turn to terrorism. The response here that there's no causal link literally makes no sense. I say explicitly that if you don't have a job, you have to turn to something. The only thing that provides you economic opportunity is terrorism. There's not enough for them to go for this in the PMR, which means you buy the fact that there's going to be regional instability and war, which probably shrinks the well-being of these countries.
Great. Quick off-term roadmap. We're going to be going in the order of just some refutes on new points brought up in the neg block, then going over our main points in this debate and why we win under the net benefits framework. Okay, my time will begin in 3, 2, 1. So judges, my job in this speech is to make this debate as clear as possible. Okay, let's go straight into the refute. So to start off, the negation in their neg block gets up here and they tell us that there is a double bind. A double bind exists. Either you overfish or you feed the people. You don't have to make up the lost margin as long as you are still profitable. We want to make that very clear. It's just lost profits from the larger cushion that is the premiums that they have already mentioned, right? They got up here and they talked a lot about how Norwegians pay an intense premium, which means that if you lose profits, well, you're losing profits from that cushion of those intense premiums. Premiums is paying more than something is worth, right?
Any response to this like premium argument? I think was brought the premium argument was brought up in the LOC. We said that Norwegians pay a huge premium for fishmeal from the African region, and that you have to sacrifice like the entirety economic. Yeah, you know.
Also, there's this, like, you make this articulation that they have a cushion right now and they can take a hit to their profits or something. That was literally never said. We made this brink scenario that they're on the edge in the LOC, and there's no response to that.
So out of that LOC, I agree. You guys definitely didn't mention it. However, we did refute in the same line of like logic, and then Shauna gets up here in his speech, and then he kind of just spends like 3 minutes actually expanding on everything that you don't mention. He actually goes into the profit incentive, which I'm going to be talking
You
about.
talk about it in LOC,
But
we
it's
can
dropped.
analyze it.
That's
now.
why we go for it.
No, but no, that's the thing.
No back and forth.
That's good discussion. The time will be presumed in 3, 2, 1. Thus, you have no need to actually overfish, right? The entire idea for why overfishing will actually decrease is because of this idea of a profit incentive, because of the margins are no longer as high, right? That's the whole thesis of their argument, that the profit margins are actually going to decrease. Okay, so if the profit margins decrease, that means you're not going to overfish because you're not going to go for fish that is in harder to reach locations. It's not in the profit incentive because then you're no longer profitable if you go to that area. So they say that Norwegian fish meal is like necessary for the survival of fish. Okay, but they don't actually ever tell us why we can't use something like yellowtail, right? Like they always just continuously say.
Okay, yeah. Any alternative that's brought up explicitly that's not soy, and also
It's the same alternate fish.
yeah, but yellowtail.
It's fish. Oh, okay. Well, I guess the specific example is
Okay, it's just the idea that they don't actually tell us why they have to use soy. They just say that there's no other option. Okay, I'm going to continue. My time will begin in 3, 2, 1. So the negation continues, right? They fail to give us a mechanism. They say that there's none other option exists, yet they never actually tell us why. Why is there no other option here? So what are the main points of this debate? So the two neg points are the economy and the Norwegian salmon supply shock versus our points on the biodiversity and starvation. So under the economy point, people aren't going to skip over to Al-Qaeda the second they lose the second that their job isn't profitable. They fail to terminalize this impact at all. Don't do it for them, right? They don't actually tell us why the economy collapsing does any harm, right? So they continuously tell us that soy is horrible. Why would they feed them soy then? The negation fails to prove to us just how Norway has no other choice. As far as we know, Chile was the first one to try. Nobody else has done it since. And thus, there is no supply shocks because there won't be soy killing fish. Right? So under our points of biodiversity, it doesn't matter if the coral is dead and it's status quo, whatever, it doesn't matter. Because it doesn't help to barrel through it in the first place, killing the fish that they didn't intend to, right? The decrease of overfishing because of the profit incentive that I've already mentioned, right? You're not going to be trawling as much, which means you're not going to be barreling through the coral reef. So even if the coral is dead, sure, but as long as you're not killing the other fish that's in that area that could be actual food, right? And so that is the biodiversity point, right? There's less access to medicines, less other fish, which actually provide food for the for the West Africans. Then there is the actual fish argument itself. These fish are edible, as we already mentioned, and as was conceded, that it's predominantly Muslims, right? People do eat these fish in the status quo, and they have ate it in the past. So then you're looking at ISIS plus Al-Qaeda versus feeding another 20 million people, which is far more probable. But not only that, the magnitude is much higher because 20 million people being fed versus is far greater than the only impact that they provide, which is economic suffering that they haven't, again, actually terminalized. The only part that they actually terminalized from this was the Al-Qaeda and ISIS narrative. Thus, we layer above. The health in food is a prerequisite to having disposable income. So, for that reason, we tell you that to value the lives of West Africans above all else, right? When you actually have a population that has
Point of
52
order.
million now. Yeah.
I know weighing is allowed, but the argument that health and food is like the prerequisite of the internal link to disposable income, like the argument that there's an internal link there is just like weighing is
Yeah, internally.
Okay, again, it's just
Yeah, whatever,
weighing.
doesn't matter.
Okay. My time will resume in 3, 2, 1. So the negation fails to actually tell us why we should care about their impacts. They don't actually weigh their impacts versus ours. They kind of come up with these claims like, oh yeah, buy this, but they don't actually ever tell you what the terminalized impact of the economy actually is, the economy collapsing actually is. So why is food insecurity the primal impact of the round? So 1, it's death. We outweigh everything. The decline in the salmon industry and their disease doesn't actually terminalize. So food insecurity outweighs economy 10 times out of 10. Food insecurity outweighs less salmon 10 times out of 10. Again, for the reasons that they haven't provided any other, they haven't actually told us why these salmon can't be fed with something else. Grant them everything, and we still have a chance of saving over 50 million people. We tell you that the situation is horrible right now, right? There are 52 million people who are malnutrition. There are tens of millions of people who lack access to food, just pure access to food, not only good quality food. So we tell you that the most affordable option of animal protein, as I mentioned in my first speech, and the second highest bidder are both West Africa and the pelagic fish, which means that is the pair that needs to happen in order for West Africans who are starving in the status quo to gain any chance of getting out of this loop of like starvation. With that, I urge you strong vote for the affirmation status debate. Thank you.
Good, guys.